Kate, who will also jump online to quickly introduce themselves as well. If I can see them pop up. There's Kate. Hey, Kate, did you want to do a quick hi?
Good morning. Yes, hi, my name's Kate Batty. I'm a practice officer with the Children's Task Force. Looking forward to running through the session today with you.
Thanks, Kate. And Maria?
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Maria Periskeep. I'm one of the practice officers from the Children's Task Force as well.
Thanks, Maria. So a couple of quick things before we do get started. So we're conscious that there are a few people on the line with us today, and usually we really do love to see everybody. But as we've got quite a few people on the line, we just ask if everybody's please happy to turn their cameras off. That way we can try and save as much bandwidth for everybody who's on the line with us today. And another note that we have started a recording for today's session. So we'll be recording today's session so that for anybody who isn't able to join into a session, or for anybody who would like to rewatch the session to try and help, the content sort of sink in, we really encourage that as well. So we will have a recording available for everybody to jump into after all of the sessions that have been held. So we will be recording today's session where we'll be running through the slides, and then we'll stop the recording once we've run through the main content, and then we'll be holding a question and answer session at the end. So if you do have any concerns in terms of the recording, please just send us a message. Alrighty. So I'll start off with an acknowledgement of country. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians. For me in Geelong, that is the Wadawurrung people of the country on which we meet today, and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to elders both past and present. I would like to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. So before we begin, I'd just like to really acknowledge that, some of the information that we'll be going through today might seem very new, and that's absolutely okay. We definitely acknowledge that this is a process change in CRM in terms of the steps that you follow in CRM for children who are aged over 7. So what we'll be going through in today's session is some resources, some practice guides, some standard operating procedures, operational guidelines, and we'll be providing an overview of some of the resources that are available throughout the agency to assist you to implement this process change for children who are aged over 7. So there may be some documents that we're running through today that you may not be too familiar with or haven't seen before, and that's absolutely okay. It's definitely not expected that you're currently across the material that we'll be running through today. This is definitely a starting point in regards to the implementation of the age range and the supports and processes that you'll be following for children who are aged over 7. So as a Children's Task Force, we're going to continue to develop supportive resources to assist your implementation of the age range. There's some information currently available through our Early Childhood Services intranet page. We'll continue to provide information and resources through there, continuing to develop frequently asked questions page, some case studies. So this is definitely just the start of the age range, and then we will be continuing to support you to implement the change up until it does roll out on the 1st of July. So if you do have any questions post this session, we really encourage you to get in touch with our ECS partner inbox. If you're jumping into the different practice guides, standard operating procedures, if you have questions about what it looks like in terms of CRM, we really encourage you to get in touch with us through our partner inbox, and we're definitely available to help you out with implementing the age range within CRM. Within today's session, what we'll be doing as part of each of the information sessions that we've been running, there's been questions that we've been responding to throughout the sessions. So we really encourage you to put your questions into the chat box today. That way we've got a really good record of all of the questions that are coming through from all of the early childhood partners. And then what we're going to do is collate all of those questions and then develop another frequently asked questions page to respond to the different questions that are coming through as part of the age range information sessions and to help your implementation of supporting children aged over 7 within CRM. So we definitely encourage you to be putting things into the chat box. And then as we said, what we'll be doing at the end is then running through a question and answer session with myself and Kate and Maria, and then we'll also be responding to your questions in the chat throughout the session as well. So what we'll be starting off with today is some of the information that's already available through our Early Childhood Services intranet page for a bit of a refresher to support you in implementing the age range for children who are aged over 7. There's also a support resource that's available through LEAP, and I think I saw somewhere there that Donna's popped that into the chat. Thank you, Donna. So because we are running through a few different practice guides and standard operating procedures and operational guidelines, that is a booklet that you can download through LEAP. It's got all of the slides that we're running through within the booklet. It's also got the main key points that we're talking to in today's session and has hyperlinked all of the resources that we'll be running through as well. So we really encourage everybody to be downloading that resource and just taking your time to work your way through it. And then, as we said, we acknowledge that some of the material could be new to you, and that's definitely okay. And if you do have any ongoing questions, we really encourage you to get in touch with our ECS partner team. So there's also a frequently asked questions page that's available on our Early Childhood Services intranet site to support your understanding of the planning approach for children who are aged 7 and 8 years old in CRM. So in our frequently asked questions page and in our intranet page that's available, you'll see quite commonly that CRM is referred to as SAP CRM. But throughout this presentation, we'll continue to refer to SAP CRM as CRM, as you might commonly be more familiar with it. And in the frequently asked questions document and on our intranet page currently, there is information available about ensuring continuity of experience for children and their families, which involves using the existing planning approach that's currently used for children who are aged over 7. And that approach will be used by both local area coordinator and early childhood partners for plan reassessments and first plans in CRM. So as a result of this information session and the content that we'll be running through today has been tailored to provide you with an overview of the key process steps required to develop an NDIS plan for children who are aged 7 and 8 years old. So what we'll be running through is the process that you'll be using to update the severity tool, to submit and complete the guided planning questions, completing the planning conversation tool, generating a support plan, which creates a typical support package, or you may have heard that referred to throughout the agency as a TSP, through the determine the funded support task. We'll also be running through how to complete the justification comments within the review and submit plan for approval task. There's a couple of case studies that we'll run through at the end, and then we usually have about 30 to 45 minutes allocated at the end to then run through any further questions. So as I've mentioned, this information is available on our Early Childhood Services intranet page, as well as the age ranges frequently asked questions page. So we'll start by providing an overview of the age range and key questions that have been asked by early childhood partners to date. And as I've mentioned, we really encourage you to then put any further questions into the chat box to support your understanding of the age range change. So as part of the ECEI reset, the early childhood age range is being changed from younger than 7 to younger than 9. So the recommendation as part of the Early Childhood Reset is recommendation 14, which aims to increase the age limit for children supported under the early childhood approach from under 7 to under 9 years of age. And that's around helping children and families to receive family-centred support throughout their transition to primary school. Changing the age range from younger than 7 to younger than 9 will ensure that young children are supported throughout their transition to primary school, and it also aligns the scheme with the World Health Organization definition of young children, which is 0 to 8. So the age range will be coming into effect as of the 1st of July this year. And although this session is tailored towards the access, pre-planning and planning requirements for children who are aged over 7, it's also important to note that it has been mentioned in the frequently asked questions page that early connections will continue to be available for children younger than 9, including support to apply to the scheme for children who are aged 7 or 8, or supporting children and families to connecting with mainstream and community services and that information provision that you're currently really familiar with. So we will be going over the access process shortly and supporting material that you'll use to assist a family to apply for the scheme where it is appropriate. The early childhood referral form is being updated to be available for children who are younger than 9 to be referred to you as an early childhood partner. And when you receive a referral, the ECI inquiry and CRM that you will be currently familiar with will continue to only apply for children who are younger than 7. And that's because some of the efforts that you currently log as part of that ECI inquiry aren't required for children who are aged over 7. So you'll see in the next point there, we've got that the criteria for early supports hasn't changed. So early supports will continue to only be available for children who are younger than 6 with developmental concerns. So you won't be logging efforts against the supports that you're providing to children in early supports, because that will continue to only be available for children younger than 6. And when we run through the access process in a little bit more detail shortly, you'll see that your role within early connections does look a little bit different. So you won't be logging efforts against things like, for example, the efforts you'd be logging when you're completing a functional assessment and that initial information gathering. So what you'll be doing in CRM for children who are aged over 7 is completing what's called a person record to log the child's details within CRM. And we'll be running through that process in a little while with you as well. We are aware that plan reassessments are starting to become available for children who are turning 7 from the 1st of July, and you are beginning to book in these reassessment meetings with families. So there will be information for families coming to the NDIS website soon, but the experience for families will look quite similar, as they'll continue to be supported by you as an early childhood partner, and you'll continue to gather quite similar information about the child's support needs. So the key differences for you for children over 7 are about where you capture information in CRM does look a little bit different. You'll be using a typical support package as opposed to manually determining the plan budget through the Early Childhood Capacity Building Guide. But as we know, all NDIS plans are developed based on the reasonable and necessary criteria, and you'll continue to use your skills and expertise as an early childhood partner to inform the plan budget. So the typical support package is used as a starting point and a guide to reasonable and necessary supports, and we'll be going over in more detail the way that you can then adjust the typical support package if the supports generated are either below or above the child's support needs. If families are seeking information about the way that supports are considered for children using the typical support package, there's some really great information in some of the publicly available guidelines. So if you jump into the reasonable and necessary guideline, and I think it's called Creating Your Plan guideline, there's some really great information about the typical support package and how NDIS plans are developed for children who are aged over 7. So that's a really great resource to be informing families about if they are having questions about the development of a plan budget. To support your implementation of the age range, there are other resources. So some of our early childhood guidelines and our marketing products will be progressively updated to include details about the age range. So all early childhood resources and documents will be updated to include links to supporting material for children aged over 7. So if I picked one of our documents, for example, because I'm a bit of a visual person, so sometimes it helps to be able to picture what it will look like. So if I chose our early childhood planning practice guide, that resource will continue to be a supportive resource to assist the planning, pre-planning and planning requirements for children who are aged younger than 7. And then what will happen throughout the document with the different standard operating procedures and practice guides that we talk to today is there will be links throughout our early childhood planning practice guide directing you to the process to follow within CRM when you are doing the planning requirements for children who are aged over 7. So the resource will help guide you to the information and supports to assist you to implement this change for children who are aged over 7. So as we've talked through, to ensure the continuity of experience for children and their families, the existing planning approach for children who are older than 7 will be used by both local area coordinator and early childhood partners for plan reassessments and first plans in CRM. So we'll definitely be running through this in much more detail as the information session progresses, providing you with an overview of the existing access, pre-planning and planning guidance material that the agency uses to support the planning requirements for children who are aged over 7. So you will already be quite familiar with the pre-planning and planning steps that are used in CRM, as you currently use the same steps in CRM for children who are aged younger than 7. But as I've already talked through, the key differences really are where you record information in CRM does look a little bit different. And some of the pre-planning and planning tasks are a little bit different as well. So there's no change to the NDIS eligibility requirements or the definition of developmental delay under the early childhood requirements. You'll continue to support children who are aged younger than 6 with developmental delay, and you'll continue your eligibility conversations and processes for this cohort of children. There's no change to the way that you support children with developmental delay. List D will also continue to only apply for children who are aged younger than 7. The disability or early intervention requirements will still need to be met for a child to be eligible for the scheme. As you hold your eligibility conversations with families, they will continue to be required to demonstrate evidence that their child has a disability or an impairment that is likely to be permanent to continue as a participant on the scheme. You will then continue to support these children and families up until the age of 9, where you'll then transition the child over to a local area coordinator or the National Disability Insurance Agency, as you currently do for children who are aged younger than 7. And then for families who don't demonstrate evidence that their child has a disability or impairment that is likely to be permanent, you will continue your business as usual processes by completing an eligibility reassessment checklist and continuing to plan for this participant as an early childhood partner while the NDIA conducts the eligibility reassessment process and a decision is made about the child's access to the scheme. Also important to note that there have been no changes to legislation regarding reasonable and necessary supports. All supports continue to need to meet the criteria set out in Section 34 of the NDIS Act. And there's also been no changes to the way that early childhood intervention service providers support young children and families. So we'll be providing some examples of the line items that you'll be using for children who are aged over 7, as they are a little bit different as well for children who are aged younger than 7 and over 7. And that includes, for example, if we use capacity building supports as an example, that you'll be using multidisciplinary line items as opposed to the early childhood supports, early childhood professional line item, as that will continue to be in place for children who are younger than 7. But we'll be running through those key differences between children who are younger than 7 and children who are aged over 7 throughout the presentation. So just a quick overview of what this looks like in terms of the age range of children that you are supporting. So for children who are currently aged 6 and will turn 7 after the 1st of July, and their plan reassessment is due after the 1st of July, you will continue to support these children as an early childhood partner. For any children who turn 7 before the 1st of July and their reassessment is due before the 1st of July, you will transition this child over to a local area coordinator or the NDIA, as you currently do as part of your business as usual process. All children who are turning 7 after the 1st of July and are continuing to be supported by you as an early childhood partner will require a full plan reassessment for their first reassessment. So as you'd be familiar with the different plan reassessment approaches, which includes a plan renewal or a light touch plan, those two plan reassessment types won't be appropriate for the child's first reassessment as a 7-year-old, and it will be completing a full plan reassessment. And that's around ensuring that the child's current support needs are really identified as part of your planning conversation. They may be accessing different supports and services as children do start to become a little bit older. And it also means that you'll be generating a typical support package. So this process is also the same across children who have already transferred over to a local area coordinator or the National Disability Insurance Agency. And that's around ensuring continuity of supports across the scheme for children who are aged 7 and 8. Once a child who is 7 years old who has then had their first plan reassessment with you that includes the use of a typical support package, you'll then be, doing your check-ins and supporting families as you currently do. And then when they are coming up to their following plan reassessment, which could be in 12 months' time once they then turn 8 years old, you'll then be working with the family to determine what's the most appropriate approach type. At that point, it could be a light touch plan reassessment or a plan renewal, depending on the child's current support needs. But you'll continue to use your current way of determining the most appropriate plan reassessment type once the child does continue throughout the scheme. So as there are some children who have already transitioned to a local area coordinator or to the NDIA who are aged 7 and 8 before the 1st of July, these children won't come back to you as an early childhood partner. So just really clarifying that if a child has already transitioned over to LAC, they won't come back to you. They'll continue to be supported by a local area coordinator. You'll only continue to support children who are turning 7 after the 1st of July. So what that means is there will be this 2-year transition period where children will be supported by both a local area coordinator or the NDIA or you as an early childhood partner. And this cohort of children is internally referred to as the grandfather period. If you start to hear that kind of language, that's what it's referring to, that until we move through the next 2 years, and then all children are then supported as part of the early childhood approach up until the age of 9, there'll be this 2-year period where children could be in both programs, dependent on when their birthday is, either before or after the 1st of July. So as I've mentioned, for children who are aged over 7, you'll continue to provide early connections in the form of either supporting a child and family to connect with relevant community mainstream services or supporting the child and family to apply to the NDIS where it is appropriate. So your role in supporting a family to determine if it is appropriate to apply for access for the NDIS includes a discussion with the family about whether their child has evidence of disability or an impairment that is likely to be permanent. So you'd be currently familiar with completing an initial meeting to determine the child's current developmental level, as you'd be gathering information through a functional assessment to determine if the child has developmental concerns or a developmental delay or is best suited to continue on to the NDIS. And as we've already talked through, as early supports, the criteria for early supports isn't changing. So a child child, that will continue for children who are younger than 6. So you won't be determining if the child has developmental concerns, and the developmental delay criteria also isn't changing and is continuing for children who are younger than 6. So again, you won't be completing a functional assessment to determine if the child has a developmental delay. Your role really is around assisting the family to gather information about their current support needs, as opposed to completing the functional assessment yourself. And assessing the current functional information. It's about helping families to gather that functional information. So that will be completed by a health or educational professional who is already in the child's life. So when a child is referred to you or connects with your organisation, it may be a child who it is appropriate to support the family to apply for the NDIS access, or it may be a family who you support to connect with mainstream and community services. So if it is likely that the child won't continue to access and you provide information and support to the family, you could do a couple of different things to be able to log your effort in CRM. So you could either create a person record for the child in CRM, and what the standard operating procedure that's available to support you to do that is called creating a person record in the NDIS business system. And as we've already mentioned, all of these resources that we talk to are hyperlinked in the booklet that you can download from LEAP. So we really encourage you to do that as a starting point to help move through how to complete these processes in CRM. So when you create a person record in CRM, it means you can then record the child's details, so things that you'd be familiar with, like their date of birth, their address, child representative details, all of those kinds of things. And you can also then log interactions in CRM to document the type of information and support that you're providing. Another way that you could do it is if you're familiar with the community capacity building reporting form. There is a tab within that reporting form called Individual Engagement Log, and you can then be logging the engagements that you are providing to a family through the community capacity building reporting form. So both of these steps, they aren't required, but they are available to you if you would like to log your effort with a family when you're assisting them to connect with mainstream and community services or providing information provision. If you are supporting the family to apply for access to the NDIS, you will record the child's details in CRM by creating a person record. You can also provide the family with a copy of the access request form, and you can download that off the NDIS website. And that is a document that can then be used with their treating professional. So when we say treating professional, that could be the child's paediatrician, their GP, and allied health services that they're currently connected in with. And those organisations will then be providing the supporting evidence to support the child's access request to the scheme. Or the family can also call the NDIA and complete a verbal access request. If the family do provide access-related evidence to you, so for example, that could be a copy of their child's diagnosis, you will use the standard operating procedure, which is called refer access-related evidence over to the National Access branch. And this process essentially includes uploading the documents that you receive in CRM, completing an interaction, and then assigning the interaction over to the NAB. If the family contacts the NDIA directly, the NDIA will then complete that step and upload their evidence to the system and assign it over to the NAB. If the Access Met decision is made after the 1st of July, the family will then be supported by you as an early childhood partner, and NAB will allocate the application to you, ready to commence planning. So this is an overview of the pre-planning and planning steps that you'll be following in CRM for children who are aged over 7. So each of these steps will look familiar to you because you are currently completing these steps in CRM. As I've mentioned, it will just be where you're entering information throughout these steps does look a little bit different, and we'll be going through this in more detail to help you implement these process steps for children who are aged over 7. So if I start at the first one, we have severity tool on the left. So currently you'll be familiar with completing and using the PediCat to support all children's needs. So for children who are aged over 7, the PediCat only needs to be used if a more appropriate tool cannot be recorded. So that means, for example, if the child has a diagnosis, there are specific severity tools that are used within CRM to help best record children's needs. So there is a standard operating procedure which helps you to identify what the most appropriate severity tool is based on the child's primary disability, and Kate will be going through that in a little bit more detail with you. If I move to the next one, the guided planning questions. So currently you will be familiar with filling in, completing and saving the guided planning questions to record your responses. So the same questions are used within the guided planning questions for children who are aged younger than 7 and for children who are aged over 7. So you'll be quite familiar with the questions that you are using for all children. The difference with the guided planning questions is that instead of saving the questions to record your responses, you'll now be submitting the questions, and those questions are then used in coordination with the other information that you enter into CRM to generate a typical support package. So we'll be providing an overview of the guided planning questions shortly, as well as an overview of how you can adjust the typical support package if the support package generated is either below or above what you've determined is reasonable and necessary to support the child's needs. The next one along the planning conversation tool. So currently you will be familiar with the planning conversation tool as when you jump into it now, you're selecting the reasonable and necessary checkbox within the planning conversation tool. So for children who are aged over 7, it is the same planning conversation tool that you are going into. And if you've been around for a little while, you may have entered information into the planning conversation tool previously, which is now what you'll be completing for children who are aged over 7. So there are checkboxes at the top of each category within the planning conversation tool, and you'll be selecting the checkboxes that most align with the child's support needs, and then entering in functional information that's then relevant to the child's support needs in the relevant notes section of the checkboxes that you select. But we'll be going through that in a little bit more detail as well. And we've got some screenshots of the system to help you work your way through it in today's session too, just to familiarise yourself with some of these tools which you may not have been using those section of the tools before. Determining the funded supports. So currently for capacity building supports, you will be familiar with using the guide for calculating early childhood capacity building supports. So for children who are aged over 7, as I've talked to, a typical support package is generated to help consider reasonable and necessary supports, but you will continue to use your skills and expertise to determine the most appropriate funded supports for the child through the information that you gather with the family about their child's current function, developmental level, and any reports that are available to you. So your planning conversation will continue as you currently do for children who are younger than 7. The information that you gather will continue for children who are younger than 7. And the way that you support families will continue as you currently do. The difference really is being that instead of developing a plan bottom up using the guide for capacity building supports, you'll now have a starting point with the typical support package, which you can then adjust to the child's support needs as required. And the last one that we've got there are is the review and submit plan for approval tab. So same with the justification comments. Currently, you'll be familiar with recording justification comments using an early childhood template to write a best practice justification. So we'll be providing an overview of the prompts that you'll use to write a best practice justification for children who are aged over 7, and the standard operating procedure that you can use for examples to guide your justification comment. We'll also work through the plan comments and interaction templates that you'll be using for children who are aged over 7. So as both early childhood and local area coordinator partners will be supporting children and families throughout this transition period, our processes will align within CRM to support consistency throughout the scheme. What we're running through today is the current approach through CRM. And as I've mentioned, we will definitely continue to work together on the early childhood approach and transition into PACE, where we'll then see all children using a typical support package as a starting point and a guide to reasonable and necessary decision making. So this process that we're running through today is in CRM and is a temporary process until PACE is introduced. So as I've mentioned, this is definitely a starting point. We're definitely here to continue to support you to implement this age range through CRM. We really encourage you to get in touch with questions. We acknowledge that this could look a little bit different for what you're currently used to, and that's absolutely okay. Please reach out to us, and we're more than happy to continue to provide support, and we'll continue to develop resources to assist you to implement the age range. So what we're going to do now is run through the steps within CRM in a bit more detail. And as I've mentioned, we'll be going through screenshots so you can help to visualize the system as we run through it, and are providing a comparison of children who are younger than 7 and children who are aged over 7, and continue to pop your questions throughout the chat that we'll be running through within the information session as well. So I'll hand over to Kate, who will run through the next section in a bit more detail. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Steph. Okay, so we're going to have a look at first at the severity tool. We're going to work through the pre-planning process just so that we go through the process in the sort of order that you'll do it in the system. So on the screen, you can see a screenshot. There is a resource booklet as well you can download, which is fully accessible. So we'll be referring to both. So for children younger than 7, the PEDICAT's completed by the partner at every initial plan, full plan reassessment, the initial meetings. And this is in addition to any severity tool indicators that they may have. For children aged over 7, the PEDICAT is only completed where the more appropriate tool hasn't been available or cannot be recorded. So the SOP that you do for needing for this is the update the severity tools task, and it outlines which tools are the preferred tools. As you can see on the screen, we've got an example there for autism. So if you have a child with an autism diagnosis who comes in who's age 7, 8 or 9, the first severity tool that you'll be as a preferred tool is the DSM-5 criteria. And then it goes down in order. So the second is the Vinelands 3, third Vinelands 2, and then it goes down to the PEDICAT. For the example, you would only use PEDICAT if those 3 more preferred tools are not available. So when you refer to the SOP, the severity tools, you'll just need to find the most appropriate disability diagnosis. And there is quite a range on there, and then use the most preferred tools that you have. Where the evidence is provided of a change of disability for the primary disability, this request needs to be completed before generating the TSP, because the disability diagnosis for the primary disability goes to inform the TSP and the amounts created in it. We'll move on to the guided planning questions. So again, this is the guided planning questions which you're already completing. For this one, you can use the SOP complete the guided planning questions, and you'll be able to continue answering the questions in the same way as you do for children aged under 7 as you can for over 7. So the first two questions in the guided planning questions are about an introductory question and the core questions. And as with current practice, you use a conversation with the family to select the appropriate answers and update the pre-populated answers where necessary. Some fields may be pre-populated already, and this comes from the outcomes questionnaires. You need to avoid directly asking questions from the form. And you need to still have the same considerations of reasonable and necessary when you're entering the information, so you're recording the information accurately. Use the questions to guide to help check that you have all the information that you need. And then take care when answering some of the questions, because this does inform the TSP. So for example, when you're answering how much care the informal supports provide, this would be typically 100% outside school. And when you're considering the child's circumstances, we don't take into account where the mainstream services are. So for children aged 7, 8, they will be attending a full-time school. And so the informal supports is outside of the school hours. The core TSP fundings are formed by the answers given, and you may produce funding in the daily activities and social, community and civic participation budgets. For capacity building, supports are the same R&N considerations as before. Children that are school age having additional support in other mainstream settings, such as education, to work on their goals. Answer the questions for the level of support required outside of the mainstream settings. For 3 hours, needs to be included in capacity building as per current guidance. The second question asks if you require help to arrange and manage supports on an ongoing basis. Take into consideration the child's circumstances, as parents and carers would usually do this role for children under the age of 9, and then they would obviously have support of the EC partner themselves. Moving on through the guided planning questions, if you have a behaviour of concern, then this is also recorded in the guided planning questions. There's a range of behaviours you can use, and they scale from 1 or more high impact behaviours of concern at any frequency to up to 3 behaviours of concern of minor impact that occur less often than daily. If there's no behaviours of concern, mark no. Don't leave the question blank or unanswered. You continue to seek ECS advice as per the workflow for mandatory ECS advice for the children under 7. Where there's a restricted practice or a possible regulated restricted practice happening. You can find more information on the ECS page. Restricted practice will still need to go through tab for children aged over 7. Once you've completed the questions for a child that is younger than 7, then you will save, as you always do, for the guided planning questions. Can you move on to the next slide, please, Steph? And for a child who's aged over 7, you will submit the guided planning questions. This is helped to generate a TSP, and so the information that you put into the guided planning questions helps inform this. Okay, we're going to move on to the planning conversation tool, and I'll hand over to Maria.
Great, thanks, Kate. So next we're going to touch on the planning conversation tool, which is mainly referred to, as you would have heard, the PCT. And many of you may have already used the PCT previously, as it was one of the tools that we used to use to collect information, as Steph touched on earlier. So for children younger than 7, the reasonable and necessary supports explanation checkbox is the only requirement that needs to be completed. So currently you're just ticking that checkbox in the PCT, and no further information needs to be recorded in the planning conversation tool. So that remains the same. However, for children aged over 7, you will select the relevant checkboxes, and we can see some examples on the screen on the slide on the right, and this will be based on the children's support needs. You will also record relevant information from the planning conversation that you have in the notes section, which is not captured elsewhere in CRM, such as the justification comment. So when filling in the planning conversation tool, you don't need to record your justification for any adjustments to the TSP here. You would do that as part of the review and submit plan for approval task. And you do not need to collect and record information that also may be already located, for example, in inbound documents, in reports in this section. The primary purpose of the PCT is to capture your planning conversation with the families and any additional functional information that is being shared with the family with you during your meetings. So the planning, so when you fill in the PCT, the different support categories, you will only need to consider and complete the relevant section. So there's a number of different sections in there, and many or some of them might not be relevant for an individual. So for example, we've got on the screen, we can see the capacity building. And when completing the capacity building support needs, you might select checkboxes such as the transdisciplinary support package. It might be assessment by a nurse or a therapy assistant. You would then complete relevant information in the notes section underneath, such as functional information on a child's different areas of need, similar to what you're possibly already currently collecting information when you're using the justifications. Like capacity building, in the daily living core support needs, when you select the checkbox, you'll need to enter information related to the child's functional impact. So some of these categories that may be suitable for children in core daily activity, for example, are sustaining informal care. It may be that they require continence aids or hence consumables. In the capital section, this is where you would outline the participants' current AT equipment and any future AT needs if applicable. Some of the checkboxes that you may select are to refer to an assessment may be required, and you'll find that there are further examples in the PCT SOP. Just note the checkboxes do not inform the TSP. You will select the most appropriate checkbox that matches the support type that is being recommended and completed in the notes section. So next we'll move on to the determine funded supports. Okay, so there's two SOPs with very similar names. So there's a SOP for children younger than 7 and there's a SOP for children aged over 7. So for children younger than 7 years, the SOP determine the funded supports in early childhood is used. However, for children over 7 years, the SOP complete the determine funded support task is used. This SOP will assist you to generate the typical support package for first plans and full plan reassessments. It will guide you to adjust the typical support package and to use the support calculator to add specific supports in a plan. So the support calculator is a tool that is built into CRM to help you accurately calculate supports to be included in a plan. Adjustments to the TSP are calculated using the support calculator, which you may already know as line items. When determining the funded supports, you will need to make a note of the TSP amounts before you make any changes or adjustments to the TSP. This will help you determine if your changes increase the TSP by more than 10%. If you do increase the TSP by more than 10%, you will need to detail your changes and your justification within your plan submitted for approval interaction. You'll need to check that the plan reflects your reasonable and necessary decision making. So for children younger than 7, you will continue to manually build the plan budgets as you do. And for children aged over 7, the TSP is generated as a guide to the plan budget. And then reasonable and necessary adjustments can be made to the TSP to support the participants' individual needs and their circumstances. So next we'll move on to a typical support package. Great. So what is a typical support package? So a typical support package is used to help work out what supports to consider for children aged 7 and over. It is used as a starting point and a guide to reasonable and necessary supports. It can be adjusted to reflect individual circumstances based on reasonable and necessary decisions. A typical support package gives an indication of what supports we'd usually expect to be included in a child's plan based on the situation, disability, support needs and age. The TSP is automatically generated based on the following: the participant's age, their primary disability, the severity indicator score, responses to questions in the guided planning, and the risk assessment questionnaires. And as highlighted earlier, a TSP needs to be generated for all children who return after the 1st of July. A plan renewal or a light touch plan is not appropriate for these children until they've had a first TSP plan generated. And then, as Steph mentioned, a plan renewal or a light touch plan review might be, reassessment might be suitable. Where a plan reassessment request due to a change of circumstances has been approved and the participant has since turned 7, since the plan was approved, the TSP will still need to be generated and reasonable and necessary decision making applied. This is because a Section 48 is considered as a full plan reassessment. Next, generating a typical support package. So the TSP generates supports in the relevant, the core, the capacity building and capital plan budgets based on the information submitted in CRM once the generate support plan button has been submitted. And on the left, you can see the example on the screen, and we can see this generate support plan button. So core supports are generated in line with the length of the plan. So for example, if a 24-month plan has been determined as suitable, then supports in core will generate based on 24 months of core supports. However, capacity building and capital supports generate supports based on 12 months of funding only. And this is because capacity building and capital supports are expected to either reduce or are considered as once-off supports. So you must consider the participant's circumstances and adjust the support needs based on the length of the plan. Funding for items such as home modification, maintenance on equipment or repairs may generate in capital supports when you generate a TSP. Funding, though, will only generate if you've identified the need during your planning conversation and recorded the details in the responses to the guided planning questions. However, if this hasn't occurred, you can make adjustments to the TSP to ensure that these items, if required and if reasonable, are still included in the plan. And you would continue to follow the guidelines and the SOPs for the AT. When adjusting the TSP, specific supports are added to the plan using the support calculator and selecting the appropriate line items for supports that have been determined as reasonable and necessary. So the support catalogue lists all available supports providers can use lodging a payment request. You will use the NDIS pricing arrangement and price limits and their support catalogue to identify which line items and numbers and price limits which are most suitable for the different supports. The assistive technology and the home modifications and consumables guide also lists the most commonly used supports. However, it's not a comprehensive list of all supports that may be provided as reasonable and necessary under the NDIS. And links to these are also provided in the booklet. Okay, so adjusting the typical support package. So the supports generated in the TSP are just a starting point. And TSP may require adjusting for a number of reasons. Some of these reasons might be to include, which may include to ensure funding is included in the correct category, to ensure funding generated is sufficient to meet participants' needs and individual circumstances, to include items which are not typical and meet reasonable and necessary criteria. For example, this may include plan management and coordination of supports or specialist behaviour support and CB relationship budget. It may require adjustment to remove items which duplicate other supports or to remove items that have been determined not to meet reasonable and necessary criteria. So when you are looking at the supports and reviewing the TSP, you will consider all the evidence available in supporting your reasonable and necessary decision to making any adjustments. So this might include information such as anything gathered during your planning conversation, any professional reports, assessments, any recommendations by providers or families, requests, carer statements, information such as current plan supports and justifications, any change of circumstances that may have occurred, the participant goals, the participants' mainstream and informal supports, the age and primary impairment of the participant, their social and community participation, any NDIS policies, procedures and legislation. So as you can see, basically you'll be reviewing all the information that you currently take into consideration when you're making a reasonable and necessary decision around the funded supports. As mentioned a little bit earlier, you will need to make a note of the TSP amount generated before you make any adjustments to the plan budgets. This will help you determine if changes increase the total plan value generated by more than 10%. All plans that are more than 10% of the TSP will be reviewed and approved by an executive level delegate. You will need to review all evidence available to adjust the TSP, as we've mentioned, and support your justification comments. It is essential that the justification provides enough key information to support the delegate to approve an RNN decision. Any variation to the TSP value as a result of reasonable and necessary decision making needs to consider funds in the context of the participant's entire plan, their individual needs and their individual circumstances. When adding in plan management to a child's plan, please ensure that you use the individual line items. Funding may generate in the choice and control budget at the budget level. However, you will need to go in and adjust those and include those line items. Any increase to the TSP because of this funding due to adding plan management does not require executive level review before plan approval. Go into adjusting the TSP. On the screen, you can see on the left, we've got a couple of examples of line items that are commonly used for children younger than 7. And on the right, we've got a couple of examples of line items that may be used for children aged over 7. So for children younger than 7, the early childhood supports, the early childhood professional line item is used to build capacity building supports in a participant's NDIS plan. Where disability-related health supports have not been identified, specialised home-based assistance for a child line item is typically used to include core daily activity supports in a plan. However, for children over 7 years, multidisciplinary line items are used for capacity building daily activity supports as per the support catalogue, which we looked at just before, to adjust the TSP. Where core daily activity supports have been determined reasonable and necessary to fund, the line item assistance with self-care activities is mostly applied with consideration to the rates and times of the day as outlined in the pricing arrangements and the price limits. And again, where a participant has disability-related health supports, you'll continue to use line items at the high-intensity support worker rate as per our guideline disability-related health supports. So if you're adjusting the TSP, you would need to remove the funding generated in the plan budget and then use the support calculator to build the plan using line items to support your reasonable and necessary decisions. Okay. So when determining capacity building therapy supports for children younger than 7, you're currently using the practice guide, early childhood planning, alongside our guideline, reasonable and necessary supports and decision making. However, for children aged over 7, there's a practice guide called Understanding Therapy Supports, which is used alongside our guideline for RNN supports. The Therapy Supports Practice Guide provides guidance on what to consider when you are including therapy supports in a participant's plan. So this is a new practice guide that you may not be familiar with. It contains information to guide conversations about how therapy supports may help participants to achieve their goals. The practice guide provides examples and it includes information on the roles of allied health professionals and how they can assist participants to build independence, considerations for using progress reports, provider recommendations and assessments to inform your decision making about future therapeutic supports that represent value for money. It outlines key points to support justifying decisions, and it also provides in there a best practice capacity building justification example, which is a great example to look at to help, which also outlines how the supports have been adjusted in a participant's plan. So for children younger than under 7, currently report writing is included in the Early Childhood Guide for calculating therapy supports. However, for children over 7, you will need to consider whether there are sufficient support hours in the plan to be used flexibly for report writing, or whether you will be required to add additional hours for any future report writing. The Understanding Therapy Supports Practice Guide also provides further information to support your decision making to determine funding support hours. And when you do look at the Understanding Therapy Supports, some of that information will also be already currently familiar to your daily practice. Currently, you would use prompts within the EC Practice Guide for considerations related to core daily activity. Some of these prompts that you're currently using may still be relevant for children aged over 7 and to support your decision making. However, there's also our guidelines for including specific types of supports in plans for children over 7, such as supports with personal care and social and recreational supports, which are good resources to look at. And again, these links can be found in your support resource booklet. Now I'm going to hand you back to Kate, who's going to talk about our plan comments.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll look at plan comments for children younger than 9, and then children aged, younger than 7, and then children aged over 7. So for children younger than 7, we use the SOP Determine the Funded Supports in Early Childhood for templates for plan comments. For children aged over 7, the SOP we use is Complete the Determine the Funded Supports task to guide the plan comments. For core daily activities, there is a specific comment in the SOP. However, you'll see for the children aged over 7, sometimes you can find comments which are generic, and sometimes there's specific comments. So, for example, you'd use the practice guide Therapeutic Supports, which details what needs to be included in the plan comment when building comments for capacity building. So things like the purpose of the goals, the funding, how they're going to achieve the participant to achieve their goals, the amount of funding in dollars, and the expectations of allied health professionals. So an example would be $900 of funding for a speech pathologist to assess and provide strategies to increase your expressive communication skills. Assessments and reports tracking your progress must be submitted to the NDIS 6 weeks before your plan review. For mid-cost AT, you continue to use the comments in the AT item budget tool from Panda, as you do already. And you can find more information on the internet in the planning information, because we have quite a range of SOPs, practice guides and operational guides. And you can use these to support what's included for your comments in the plans. Moving on to justification comments. As at the moment, sort of the justification comment for the children younger than 7 wouldn't fit onto the slide. So I've summarised the sections that you'll use where you'll find them for the justification comments. So best practice justification examples in the SOP review and submit plan for approval. For children aged under 7, there's a template which you already use in your everyday practice. For children aged 7 years of age and up, there isn't a set template. However, there are things that you'll need to include for best practice justification. So you need to describe the support and how it relates to the participant's disability support needs. Describe how the support will help the participant work towards their goals. Describe how the support meets reasonable and necessary criteria. Refer to any supporting evidence, and so that can be included either in your PCT or a report from a provider. And the justification needs to be in each support category of the funding that's provided. So you can see on the left, the review and submit plan for approval SOP is used for the under 7s. And then for the over 7s, you've got 2 areas. So the review and submit plan for approval, and the practice guide Understanding Therapy Supports also has some core and CB daily activities examples for you to use as well. For interactions. The interaction templates for children younger than 7, you'll still continue to use as you do before. And then for interaction templates for children over 7, they're still on the same templates for interactions. However, there's different ones you can choose. So you'll continue to use pre-planning interaction for early childhood planning conversation, early childhood plan submitted for approval for first plan or plan reassessments, or early childhood plan submitted for approval, light touch or renewal. There's different interactions used for over 7s. So there's planning conversation, plan submitted for approval and plan reassessment for a renewal, plan reassessment light touch or renewal, and plan reassessment full plan reassessment. Any changes to the TSP, as Maria was talking about, are recorded in the plan submitted for approval interaction. And so you'll need to record if you've made any changes to the TSP, particularly if this is over 10% of value. Include in your justification and detail any evidence uploaded to inbound documents. So, for example, capacity building budget increase to allow for behaviour intervention supports. Similar information is recorded in pre-planning interactions for children younger than 7 and for children aged over 7. So, for example, the plan preparation interaction is the same, and if you need to record bank details, that's the same. There's a slight difference when you submit plans using WLM. So you choose the most appropriate interaction from the interactions template, then submit the plan for reassessment or approval through WLM. When you submit a plan for a child aged under 7 via WLM, you leave the interaction as closed. When submitting a plan via WLM for a child who's 7 or 8, you leave the interaction open, and this remains open until the plan's approved. Okay, we're going to look through some case studies. So there's 2 case studies that we are going to look through here. There will be more case studies available on the intranet page, and sort of we'll upload some, and hopefully we'll cover some questions for you. So in this case study, Jess is an 8-year-old participant, and she's going to be supported by her EC partner, Laura. Jess has a new diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, so ASD, level 2, and has accessed the scheme for the first time after 1 July 2023. Jess has arrived sort of with a planning meeting and has limited information to describe the functional impact from her diagnosis. So just as you do now, Laura contacts the child rep and sort of successfully makes the initial contact after the access decision. Laura completes the plan preparation interaction to record how the contact was made and where, when, and how the planning conversation will take place. Laura then meets with Jess and her family to conduct a planning conversation and discusses the goals and supports which are important to them. Laura enters the planning conversation interaction into CRM, capturing a summary of the conversation. Planning conversation notes provides evidence detailing any RNN decisions and explaining RNN to the family, as well as what supports are already in Jess's life for mainstream community and health systems. Laura will then go back to the office and start the pre-planning tasks. So Laura completes the update the severity tools tasks and uses the DSM-5 information. Laura doesn't need to pedicab, as the DSM-5 information is the preferred severity tool. She then records any additional information from the planning meeting, which isn't captured in reports, in the relevant sections of the PCT. She uses that information in the planning conversation to answer the guided planning questions and then submits. Laura will then use and press the Generate Support Plan button, which is in the Planning tab. Laura uses the TSP as the guide and determines the supports generated in the plan meet RNN criteria for Jess and fit with Jess's goals and needs. Jess attends school and mainstream supports, will work alongside Jess's NDIS plan to build her capacity and social inclusion. Laura adds the plan management line items, and this is not included in the TSP. Laura then completes best practice justifications, which describe each support and how it relates to the participant's disability support needs, describes how the support will help the participant work towards their goals, and describes what meets RNN criteria. Laura then would submit the plan through WLM using the plan submitted for approval interaction, which she'd leave open. When the plan's funded, Laura will implement the plan and support the family to connect to services in much the same way that you already do for under 7s. In the next case study, we have Mary, who is 7. So Mary's 7-year-old existing participant of the scheme, supported by her EC partner, Tom. Mary's family has provided reports with current functional information and goals that they'd like to include in her next plan. So Tom's going to consider all of the evidence, and Mary's disability is cerebral palsy, level 2. So Tom, as with you would do for an under 7, Tom will contact the family and record this in a plan preparation interaction with details of the appointment for the reassessment meeting. Tom meets with Mary's family and they discuss her goals, what's important to the family, and talk about RNN, and what services and support can be accessed through mainstream settings such as school in the meeting to support Mary. Family gives Tom reports from Mary's provider and it details recommendations for therapy and AT. Tom records a summary of the planning conversation in the plan reassessment conversation full interaction. This is because it's Mary's first plan since she's turned 7, so she'll need a full plan reassessment so that she can have a generated TSP. Tom will go back to the office, complete the pre-planning tab, and uses GMFCS score to update the severity tools task, as this is the preferred tool to the pedicab. And again, Tom won't need a pedicab. Tom records any additional information from the planning meeting, which isn't captured in the reports, and puts it in the relevant sections of the PCT. He uses this information to answer the guided planning questions and takes particular care of the question about equipment and the level of maintenance required, and then submits. Tom then presses the Generate Support Plan button in the Planning tab. He'll use the TSP as a guide and determines that the support generated values are not sufficient to meet Mary's needs. Tom makes a note of the values in the plan generated by the TSP and then adjusts the plan as required using line items into the support calculator. Tom completes the best practice interactions and justifications, and so he details the participant's disability support needs, how the partner will help the participant work towards the goals, and describes how the support meets reasonable and necessary criteria and refers to any relevant supporting evidence. Tom also needs to complete a declined support interaction, as Mary's family have asked for swimming lessons, which would not meet RNN criteria. Tom submits the plan through WLM using the plan submitted for approval interaction, which he leaves open. And again, when the plan comes back as funded, Tom implements the plan and helps the family understand supports in the plan and keeps the connection with services. Okay. Go back to Steph.
Thanks, Kate. I accidentally went too fast. Let me stop sharing. Donna, are you please happy to stop the recording? Thank you.